Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is now 7 p.m. and we are live online.
All right. Hey, everybody. So this is a workshop, and that means council does its prep work for the next formal meeting, which is next Monday. In terms of attendance, I see a full house, so I will just declare all of the council is present. And I see the city administrator, and I believe we've got one or two city attorneys online.
Two for a price of one, Mayor. Nick Ward-Willis and my colleague Christian Gates is here. I will be here just for the first part.
Okay. So.
And the city planner, Natalie Quinn, is also on.
Oh,
Hi,
is that
Natalie.
right? Natalie,
Yep.
are you there?
Hi, good evening.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being there. Okay. So got some interesting topics. Let's talk about the concept plan at 248 Tyranda Ave. And I'm going to let Nick and Natalie run with this one, right? And we asked Amber to join us for the meeting, and so please participate in the discussion. Should we introduce the topic?
Thank you, Mayor. If you don't mind, I'll kick off the topic and provide an overview for the board. I note the applicant's representative, Jay Blumfeld, is present also, but I've asked if I could just provide an overview of where we've gone, where we'd like to discuss today, and then what the next steps would be. And then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. So what you, council may recall, is that the 248 Tyranda Avenue project was approved with two residential buildings referred to as 200 and 300 that had 64 residential units and a commercial building for building 100. At your last workshop and over the past numerous months, the council had heard discussions that the commercial construction was not viable. At the last workshop, the council recognized and agreed that commercial construction in building 100 was not appropriate or could not be done, and that residential with enhanced BMR units would be a public benefit that the council would consider. So in the Fishkill Creek Development Project, it's a two-step process. The first is that the council needs to review a concept plan that looks at a high level, not what's planted or how the traffic flows, but rather what's being built, what's the bulk, what's the number of units, and you're generally looking at the other issues. And then the planning board during site plan review gets into the details of making sure that the stormwater, the parking, the traffic, and things of that nature work. So what we'd like to do tonight is discuss with you what would be the appropriate number of residential units to be constructed at this property. So there would be an amended concept plan presented that would require public hearing, adoption by the council, and then it would be referred to the planning board for an amended site plan, also subject to a public hearing, subject to review by the city planning board and the county planning board, and then ultimately consideration for approval. What the council and the public and the applicant should keep in mind is that this is a disturbed site in the sense that the area that is going to be developed has already been graded, cleared of trees to the extent there were trees to be removed, infrastructure brought into the site, stormwater management practices developed, and some parking constructed. And Ben, if we can put the first slide up on the screen, please, that will help tell the story and guide our discussion. And so the mayor, Amber, and the city planner, Natalie, and myself met with the applicant's representative to sort of frame the discussion for tonight's meeting. What we had asked them to do is walk us through what's being approved and then also what could be built at the site. So up on your screen now is just the overview of what's currently constructed and approved. And you'll see there are three buildings. On the right-hand side of the screen, it's buildings 200 and 300. Those are the residential buildings that are built and occupied. There are three-story residential with basement parking. And there are a total of 64 units in those two buildings, 32 in each, I believe, with 8 BMR units. More than the 10%, it was originally 6, and then as part of the council's agreement to allow the residential to be occupied before the non-residential was built, the applicant allocated 2 additional units as BMR units. So you have 6 as of right, and then 2 additional ones that the council was able to secure last December for a total of 12.5%.
Hey, Nick, just for orientation, Tyranda is to the upside of that map. 9D is to the right? Do we agree?
Correct.
Yep, and the creek is below on the map.
That is correct. And the entrance off of Tyranda is on the far left of the screen beneath the word spaces.
Yep.
So that is how the site is accessed. So you come into the site off of Tyranda Avenue, and you come up to building 100, which presently now is just a foundation, and that's the pad that was approved for 2-story commercial. And the total parking on site is 184 spaces, of which 164, I think, are presently constructed, and then there's provision for land bank parking spaces. And so we've outlined in blue the potential developable area. So building 100 foundation only, and then buildings 2 and 300. So what's in front of you is sort of the building footprint, the developable area that is already disturbed, and infrastructure such as water, sewage, electricity already brought to the site. So it's ready for any additional construction. Then if we can go to the next slide.
Nick, as you go to the next slide, just a question about that slide. It looks like Building 100 is roughly the size of Building 200 and 300 put together. Is that roughly accurate?
No, Building 100 appears to be half the size of Building 200.
Yeah, Molly, I think, so the
Right,
the
but
green
Sorry,
boxes,
the blue area, the buildable site,
that's potential.
that's potential.
But
So
the
potential
pad is
site.
reflected in that green square, right, Nick?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so the pad exists, and then the blue area is the potential for how the area that could have additional building as part of whatever concept plan could get approved.
That
Okay.
is correct, yes. Yes. Okay, so in building, in the next slide, what we'd asked the developer to do is provide us with a rough outline of a concept plan of what I refer to as the low end. So we wanted a bookend. What is, if you kept the existing footprint, how many units could reasonably be constructed? And also, what is potential maximum development at the high end? What could be built that would be feasible and achievable? So I'm going to start on the low end of the bookend. And of course, you can have a number in between the two, but at least this helps frame our discussion. So the low end on the left-hand side of the screen is using the existing footprint of Building 100, so no change in its bulk, other than increasing the height from 2 stories to 3 stories. This would allow 51 additional units, a combination of 1-bedrooms and studios. It would bring the total units to 115, total parking spaces of 184 in conformance with code, and then the applicant had discussed going above the 10% BMR provision by adding an additional 5. So with 51 units, there would be 8 additional BMR units to the existing 8, so then there'd be a total of 16 on the project site. There would be 5 units required by your 10% and 3 additional units for a total of 8. We've also added projected tax revenue. And so the city would receive approximately $81,000 in tax revenue from the additional 51 units. The school district would receive $150,000 in additional tax revenue. And this is the low end without increasing the footprint of the building into that blue area that was on the prior slide. And so this brings 51 units that aren't presently part of their plan or approved, of which there would be an additional 8 BMR units, of which are not presently required or approved. On the high end, on the opposite end, would be constructing 2 new buildings in that blue area, and they're referred to as buildings 100 and building 100A and building 100B. Those 2 buildings would be similar to the existing buildings 200 and 300, matching what's on the site. They would be 3-story residential with basement parking. That would allow 136 additional units of housing, bringing the total with the present 64 to 200 units. Total parking spaces of 231, all built on site, as you can see, under the garage and surface parking. And then the applicant had proposed 20% BMR units. And with 136 additional units, that would be 27 new BMR units, 14% based upon the 10%, and then 13 additional ones based upon going up to 20%. So in this scenario, there would be 200 total units, and there would be 35 BMR units, and the rest would be fair market value units. And then the tax revenue from these additional units at 136 would be $216,000 for the city and $400,000 for the school district. And again, under either scenario, infrastructure is there, the area to build a parking lot is already being cleared, the Greenway Trail already exists, and the utilities are already there. So from a planning perspective and looking at your sustainability, this offers that attractiveness of already land that is capable of being developed without having any further impact to the environment. So these are the two options that we thought would start the discussion, with one on the low end and one on the high end, 51 units with 8 BMR units, 136 with 27 BMR units, associated tax revenue, and of course, there could be discussions about what's in between. And Ben, if you can just go back to the second slide, the prior slide for a moment. Correct, so we receive that blue area of building 100, there would be two buildings called 100A and 100B within that blue area that line up in architecture and size and bulk similar to the existing buildings 200 and 300. And then, Ben, we can go back to the slide, and then you'll see just that breakdown on the right-hand side of the two new buildings, 100A and 100B, that would be all acceptable off of Tyranda Avenue.
Yeah, Nick, I think just a couple of points of information and maybe some additional thoughts as we have our discussion. There, regardless of any plan here, there is no impact to any of the greenway or trail facilities. So those would remain as is, which is already a public benefit that we have on the site. And I think, the other thing that's really interesting about this is, I think it was in our last workshop, we were talking about inclusionary zoning, and that we are likely at a point where we are going to have to figure out the right balance there, that we are really at probably a point in time where there's going to be a little bit of give to get something. And so I think this is an interesting use case to kind of think about what those boundaries might be for us as a council. I think that the plans that we're seeing are interesting. We are certainly seeing an increase in the BMR units, which was what the council wanted to focus on. So I think that's positive. And I would just be interested in everybody's thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that struck me immediately, is that it's a 20%, and we're operating currently at 10%.
Yeah.
We've been told that if we ask for 20%, that it could discourage developers. But it seems by this, the calculations still work for the developer.
Yeah, I think the nuance here, George, is that there will be a little bit more mass or density at the site than was on the original concept plan that was approved.
Right.
But the applicant seemed to feel that they could make those numbers work.
Well, yeah, but the thing that you're seeing in this is you're seeing if you allow more units, then you could get to a higher percentage, which is what we've been talking about,
Right, the
right?
numbers work
We could
out.
give a tax benefit, but the easier approach is allow more units. That makes all of the fixed cost of the project spread over more units, and then you can get a little bit more,
Right.
right?
Has there been any discussion about impacts of both traffic along Tyranda and surrounding streets? I assume, and Nick, maybe you can answer this, that this would need an additional traffic study. So I don't know, I also have just a clarification, like we can approve, 1,000 units, but if the traffic won't support it, then that doesn't work. So I'm just wondering what the process is for us to get the information we need to make sure we're making a decision on a concept plan that has, and maybe the part of the process, no, you have to approve the concept, and then we hear from our traffic professional consultants to know whether or not this is feasible or what needs to be done. I'm also worried about Tyranda and pedestrians. A lot of pedestrians use it. I appreciate there will be the trail and the sidewalk through the property, but it does involve going down and then back up again if you're walking through it, essentially. And so I could imagine a lot of pedestrians would continue to want to use Tyranda who kind of don't live in that property.
Aren't we going to have a rail trail right next to Tyranda?
Well, that might be part of what I kind of want to know as well, kind of that how that's moving forward as we approve that. So there's just, both cars and pedestrians kind of make use of this area, and so I just kind of want some clarity about how we should be thinking about that too, even though it sounds like the site itself has the sewer and the water and the other infrastructure to support up to the highest end number of units.
So Molly, you're correct, those would be required to be evaluated. The planning board acted as the lead agency and issued a secret determination, and they would have to do so here. They would have to evaluate the impacts and issue an amended secret determination. It's going to be a more focused, narrower review here because it's already constructed site and they've done all the underlying base work. So you focused on two of the areas that they would look at, traffic and pedestrian. So that would be the next step, and the council would need to know that before the concept plan is approved. However, they do need, as you mentioned, the number. So we need to know what's being studied. And if it's 136 units, they would then do a traffic count with 136. They would look at the pedestrian access. But for the first step of this council, what I'd like to walk out from this meeting is it's not a commitment, but it's at least a concept that the city council is interested in X numbers, because that number will guide what gets studied and the impacts that are looked at. And when you get that information, you can then tailor it to the unit count to the information you receive. So if you say, for example, study 136, and they come back and the traffic suggested should be a different number less than 136, you have that ability and authority to do so, or maybe it justifies 136. But we need some direction from the council before we get that information for you.
Yeah, and Nick, maybe it would be helpful, I found this helpful because it's easy to kind of jump to the next step and want to get all of the details. And I don't know how many council members here have been through the concept plan approval process. It is much more high level than the detail of the parking and all of that. So Nick, maybe you could kind of guide us through what are the characteristics that the council is looking for in terms of saying that we're ready to approve an amended concept plan. Like I see in code, it's, applies with the vegetative buffer, it meets the design standards, it's consistent with our planning. I don't know if there's certain things that we need to consider, if you can kind of run through those.
I can, and I'll send the council that direct citation so you'll have it as well. So I guess the way to look at it is what you're not looking at. So you're not looking at your traditional site plan. What is the traffic flow? Where's the loading dock for the moving trucks? Where's the fire access lanes, the parking spaces, how many trees are being planted? Those are all site plan details. You're looking at this site plan from a larger viewpoint. Is there enough vegetation to protect and preserve the Fishkill Creek? Is the general architecture in keeping with the character of the community? Is the traffic flow sufficient to not impede existing traffic levels and also allow for safe fire access and things of that nature? You're not getting into the details at this level. You're leaving that to the planning board. So at this point, I would be looking at, are you comfortable with the number of units, the location of the building, and the bulk? And then these studies about height and architecture and maybe some renderings would then come out at the next meeting and further guide your discussion as you review the concept plan.
Yeah,
Nick, I want to make sure I'm understanding, also following the discussion that happened with the planning board and the point that Karen made about council considering bulk, particularly along this Fishkill zone. We're talking about, increasing a story beyond what was originally approved. Am I correct in understanding that we should not be considering that feedback from the planning board until the next phase?
No, the planning board would review the concept plan and give you comments as they do the secret review, and you should determine the bulk. So if you felt 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories was not appropriate, then you should say that at this time when you review the concept plan. It's the other more detailed nuances. What are the windows? What's the architecture? What's the treatment? What's the roof looking like that you wouldn't be paying attention to? But the height is something that's part of bulk that you would be considering at this time when you look at the concept plan?
Okay, in that case, I think I would be very interested in seeing a drawing of some kind to see what the view would be from street level. I recall seeing drawings of this, years ago when this was first approved, and I think that would be relevant information. I should say, having said that, I am, leaning towards greater density and the higher percentage of BMR we would get from that, but I do want to do the correct due diligence in the right order.
Do you have an idea of which street, when you say street?
I mean
view?
Tioronda.
Tioronda, okay. Tioronda looks down into these buildings, are?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. That's a little bit tricky, but, some rendering to take into account elevation. Yeah, it would be interesting to see what it would look like from across the creek, but I don't know that makes any sense, given that's really the view of residents. There aren't really view sheds we would be protecting from public access.
Yeah, so from Tioronda, and I've done it both with car and walking and bike, it's pretty straightforward to see what it will look like because there's 2 existing buildings already there, right? And so I would just encourage you to go have a look, but I don't think that we would be, should be that worried about it. At least that was my sense when I took a careful look. I think we're correctly discussing the trade-off, though, of if you, as Amber kind of suggested, as we think about providing an incentive, not just on this site, but just going forward, the concept of if you want to get a higher percentage of BMR, you're going to have to allow some density to cover the cost associated with that. And so I think that's the right trade-off for us to be considering. I would probably end up somewhere in between because, remember, we're going to have residents that are concerned with, the traffic patterns and other things. But, it's up to each member of the council to have a viewpoint.
Yeah, was there any discussion at the meeting about at what level of unit density it tipped from 15% to 20% BMR? To your point, Amber, that we're looking to see if there are opportunities and ways that we could increase it. I just didn't know if that came up, just as we consider something that might fall in between. I wouldn't want to pick a number that's one below a potential higher percentage of BMR.
There aren't numbers like that. It's a range, right? As the number of units goes up, that percentage goes up kind of incrementally.
Okay, great.
Right, so if you pick something in between,
It'll
you
be
get
in
something
between the 15.
18.
Yeah, and similarly, was there discussion of the type of units that I can imagine? It might be that there are, say, more studios or smaller units to try to fit in the buildings, and was that, I also don't know from our point of view, is that something that we can and should dictate, like the actual literal types of units, or is that more at the site plan approval phase?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the discussion, and I found it really interesting. The 2 buildings that are already built and are leasing are mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms. So, and the applicant stated, or kind of said, I'm not going to quote them exactly, that they were also getting interest in 1-bedroom and studios, so they were trying to kind of balance the overall mix of what the offerings are on the site.
I think we're skipping over something pretty obvious here in terms of the new creative thinking, what we're doing with this site, too. It's like we talked about there being some commercial use there. Last time we discussed this, I asked a question about, was there consideration of some mixed use where you could have residential in the same building and potentially some commercial uses? I'm thinking particularly in this area, there's a dearth of other available resources that could prevent some traffic flow to Main Street. It just seems like there's a number of uses, including childcare or small stores, laundry, some other things that would be very valuable to local, not only the people in the buildings. And so, now that we're thinking creatively about adding more building space, was there a discussion about a mixed-use approach to this? Because I still fundamentally have a problem with this additional request because of efforts to identify commercial for a building that was never built. I still find that to be very unrealistic, that you could entice some types of businesses that have a 15-month planning horizon that could be feasible. So, if we're talking about new concept plans, I would like to see concept plans that include some type of mixed use of this site.
Respectfully, I think we have beat that horse.
I fully disagree with that.
That's okay, we're allowed to disagree, we each have our own vote. I think that what we are hearing from the applicant consistently over the time that we've been talking about this is that they are not really in a position to support a mixed use in this place. So by switching to residential, they are able to give us more BMR. If we were to insist on a ground floor of commercial space, I think we would be back to 10%. I think we've had so many conversations about the commercial use, and it's just not netting out in this particular project.
I don't agree. I don't think
It's
we've
fine
had
that
this
you
type
don't
of,
agree.
no, I just don't believe we've had the type of conversation about this potential mixed use and/or outreach to tenants. One email return is what I heard in terms of a survey effort to determine what current residents might like, because it's early on, and there's a whole neighborhood surrounding this, and a school not too far from this location. The idea of just residential in this location is, I have problematic.
So I'm going to be on the opposite side of that comment, which is, if there's going to be any commercial at all, I want it on Main Street. I want to preserve on Main Street and make sure it succeeds. This is not the area for it. They have marketed this for a year. So as far as I can tell, we're done. It's not our job to do marketing for them, nor to assess, what uses are possible as opposed to the reality of what, marketed and what was found, which was, we're not there. So I think we're past this, and I'd rather see more BMR units.
Speaking of BMR units, I was wondering, maybe this is a question for the developer. Do you know the formula that you're currently working with to determine eligibility and cost for the BMR units? Is it 30% of 100 AMI or 30%? So the existing is 30% of 100. It's currently 30% of 70, which allows people with less money and to pay less. So the lower the percentage, the more affordable it is, basically. Is that correct?
Right, these units would not be the grandfathered units as some of the older ones were. This would have to comply with the current law, which makes it greater affordability.
Mm-hmm. Well, as part of this negotiation, I think I would ask if it was possible that as the units, the BMR units in the first two buildings, as they became available, that it reverted back to the current, or reverted to the current calculation, which is 30% of 70. Right now, they're getting 30% of 100, and I think we have an opportunity here to get them to be more affordable than they currently are.
Right. You recognize that it changes the economics. So if you ask for that, you effectively get a lower percentage of BMR.
Yeah.
Right? So instead of, 15 units, you might only get 13 or 12 if that's what you're looking for, right?
Why would you get fewer units? I'm not following that.
The rent received is lower, therefore the ability to support it goes down, right? It's, there's two numbers that drive the answers here, which is what percentage of the units are below market rate, and then secondly, how far below market rate are they? Those two numbers, either one, if you go higher on the percentage or lower on the BMR rent, you affect the economics. And so they're going to change the answer.
Economics of the developer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but currently he's offering 20% of the new unit, 20% of the new construction at 30% of 70%.
Is that what?
So that's what he's offering now.
I think that's right, Nick.
So
is that
the eight
accurate?
That's not what he's offering. That's what he'd be required to do under the code, yes.
Okay.
Right. And so I'm just saying, the 8 that currently exist in the existing buildings, can they revert back, can they operate under the same percentage that we're currently asking?
So if I may, I think what that boils down to is...
You're going to need a microphone.
We just,
Jay, you want to come up here for a minute?
So I would just think that that all boils down to a financing question. So when a bank looks at this project, and what you're essentially telling them, if we, let's say, entertain that, is that right now we're projecting X rent roll. You juxtapose that to expenses, they figure out the net income and what they're willing to finance. You're essentially telling them also, keep in mind that you're guaranteed a reduction in rent roll over a certain amount of time that's that's not known. So I'm not saying that we can't do that, I'm saying that that's what comes to mind right away as the challenge.
But the, the buildings, they're currently financed already, the existing buildings, and they're built. And so you're not asking for financing for those buildings
Well, no, it would all be,
as one big project.
yeah, so the way that we would do financing on this, regardless of how we proceed, is them looking at the totality of the project. We've already had discussions with the bank, Berkshire Bank, who finances us now. And we've talked about different avenues, and that's a lot of what informed our, coming back with our different plans and what we think is viable. We obviously calculated the construction, but it really all boils down to financing. We can't do this without the bank, and that's what comes to mind right away, is that if we're basically telling them we're going to be lowering units over an undetermined amount of time, and they look at a 30-year loan as a 30-year loan. So that would be my challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's only, it's 8 units we're talking about.
I could do the math. I'm
Yeah,
not saying no.
I think it's worth discussing, and I think it's good to consider it as a possibility.
100% we'll discuss it when we'll run some numbers.
So George, do you have a lean on like which of the like low end, high end, somewhere in the middle? Like
I'd
which
be
which are
happy with
you?
the high end. I mean, I think, what we're talking about is to get that additional units, the additional 20 BMR units. I would lean toward that, but I think we should ask for more than the 20%, and I would like to get the existing units, as most of the other, developments of this scale, they're all paying
Yeah.
the 30 of 70.
Okay,
Yeah, I
well-
mean, I think that's the next step in this process, is like to give some guidance so that they can kind of go back and provide more detail and, answer some of the questions about what would the buildings, like what would the height be, like what does it look like in situ. So just trying to kind of see where people are
Yeah,
leaning.
I'm leaning toward giving it to them, but I would like to see them go back and calculate whether or not that's feasible.
Yeah.
And whether or not we think it's important enough to make it a deal or no deal.
Yeah,
So the only thing I would add is that our below market rate unit is a workforce housing arrangement, and I'd like us to stay focused on workforce for that 10%. We have, dedicated low-income projects in Beacon, one of them is just, re-renovated for another 40-year period. And so those sort of satisfy, a certain level of income and affordability. This program is meant to be workforce, and I actually think that the range, the original 100% range and the new 70% range is appropriate. So I would be reluctant to kind of go in that direction. Obviously, if we want to go in that direction, the total percentage of BMR units is going to drop. And you may want to see that, but I frankly don't. So I would rather have more affordable units as a percentage and worry about the 70 versus 30 in other ways. 70 versus
I'm still
100%.
not following why the amount of units would drop. I might be dense, but
He just said that they're going to look at all of the income of the project. So if the income on the existing units drops, that means the ability to afford another affordable unit goes away.
that's to be calculated.
They've already given us
I
a
mean,
range.
we make the requirements as to how many units they have to provide.
Sure.
They have to figure out if they can afford to do that.
Okay, so you're basically, what you're saying is you want to bargain further in terms of, because you could also say, why don't we do 25% affordable
No,
or
I just-
50?
I'm willing to, I'd like to bargain this, yes.
Okay, all right, so let's see what they say.
I'm also interested in what you're proposing, George, and I think it's good to put it on the table. I'd also be interested to hear from Natalie potentially, or whoever would be appropriate, to look at, Lee, you just named that you believe our current percentages are targeted towards what you define as workforce housing. I'd be very curious to see those actual numbers based off of whatever is appropriate data, whether that is the average salary of a teacher or the kinds of employees that we are targeting this housing towards, and make sure that that is correct based off of current numbers. I keep going back to the Dutchess County housing study that happened back in 2022, and I do hear you, Lee, that, the biggest gap we saw in terms of housing is truly subsidized housing, which can really only be addressed by places like Tompkins Terrace or Beacon Housing Authority. But I do believe that there is another sort of group between those folks and people who are at the 80 to 90% of AMI that we should be addressing the needs of. And if there is a way, as George is proposing, if I understand correctly, to create more units for that in-between income level, I think we should be considering that. And if there's additional data that can clarify if we're addressing that or not, I don't know if Natalie's the right person for that or if it's somebody else from the county. I'd like to be looking at that.
Okay. I don't think that George is proposing more units. He's proposing,
Just add just make the ones that currently exist, be 30% of 70% as opposed to 30%
yeah.
of 100.
I think
Yeah.
when we do the work, we will discover that the AMI is the countywide AMI, and the countywide AMI is probably not Beacon rents. It's calculated as a county, and as I think you all should be aware, our rents as a percentage of countywide AMI are significantly higher than the rest of the county. And so having a requirement of 30% of 100% AMI is probably targeting the right group here in Beacon.
But then why did we reduce it to 70%?
I think we wanted to widen it out. But
Which
I
is
think
what
if you
I'm
look at
asking
the
for.
numbers, again, I'm happy to look at the numbers, but I think when we do, we're going to discover that if we're targeting workforce, we're probably in the right spot. But I'm okay either way. The issue is I'm going to see fewer units total, which is not what I want. I'm looking for more units.
And I think for this next discussion, I think we have the request from the council to look at the AMI issue. We can continue that and bring back information, but we do need to let the applicant know, are they looking at the low end, the high end, or something else? I don't know if there were other on the council who wish to offer that opinion.
I would agree with what George is saying and Paloma, and I would like to acknowledge Jeff in his comments, because I do agree. This whole project, I feel like, even the developer had said last week he did what we wanted. I would have hoped a developer would have done more, because it's what they want for their property that they own. But we're beyond that, I agree. And I know everybody wants residential. I would like to know on this, when it was originally approved, what was it originally the number of units going for? And were there any concerns of view sheds? Because if there were, now we're looking at going 3 stories where there weren't any buildings.
So I will, Pam, pull up those old approval resolutions and find that summary. I recall the project was initially approved with 100 units, and then with the changes to the zoning code, that was reduced by 36 units to 64. I don't recall if the size or bulk of the building changed, but we'll gather that information.
And then I also was just confused at the concept plan of the lower and the higher. The higher is using the current, the foundation that's currently there as a piece of it, or they're adding to that, or this is like, we're getting 3 extra buildings? I was a little confused.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to go on.
I think that's kind of, again, just kind of the next step would be a little bit more detail on what that looks like, depending on what the council agrees. Like, we don't want the applicant to go and come up with like 15 different concept plans. So we want to try and give some direction. But I think the initial potential concept, if we went with the higher end, is that there could be two buildings or one kind of longer building that's connected. It would use that kind of green block that we saw on slide 1 that's already the pad, and then there would be like an additional kind of annex on the building that would provide the additional units. If we went with the low end, the footprint would be the pad that exists today, and then, something in the middle is the other option.
And if I'm understanding correctly, in the higher option, that blue area that does not have a pad would be dug down for basement parking, or built up and it's
It would-
3 stories on top of additional parking?
It would essentially stay exactly the level that it's at, and it would mimic the level of 200, 300. It would actually look a lot like 200, 300 on the other side. And what would happen is that parking would come straight through until you get to the current foundation. And the current foundation would be a lower level down. We kind of called that a sub-basement or something like that, a cellar level. And then there's 3 stories on top of the parking, which continues over to that building 100 footprint, same as 200, 300.
So is the total height in the high end higher than the total height in the low end option because there's parking underneath, or no?
No, I don't believe so. It just ends
Okay.
up that your parking, the levels are funky there because it's just
Right.
the
Yeah, I think that's
property
part of
grade.
why, I can imagine it, but I think it would
In-
be helpful to have a rendering.
Right, in
I
the
agree.
different scenarios that we came up with, there's no height that exceeded 200, 300. The topography changes a little bit.
Right.
We've explored that a little bit from the street level, and I think we could do something from the street level that could give a better idea. It's hard to visualize without that visual, I guess.
Right.
So Paloma, I think earlier you said that you would want to see the higher end.
Yeah, I think I would like to be able to have a visual reference for the higher end, and I think I am interested in the higher end. I want both what Lee is saying
Yeah.
of more units and what George is saying of,
More affordable
pushing what's
units.
possible with
Yeah.
affordability.
And Pam, what were you leaning towards in terms of what we want to come back and see more details on?
I'm a visual person, so I'm having a hard time visualizing this. I'm concerned it's going to be too long without a gap for the higher plan, that I feel like there should be breaks in the two new buildings,
Yeah.
that there is a break.
I guess hypothetically, and again, part of our code does talk about preserving view sheds, and that's part of our decision into concept plan approval. So maybe if I pose the question as, in terms of what we've seen tonight, low end, high end, somewhere in the middle, do you
Somewhere
feel?
in the middle to high end.
Okay, yeah, I was
somewhere.
gonna say, do you feel like willing to allow a little bit more density for more units? And we can kind of work out the detail.
Well, and then I'm going to ask the question, when do you think this is this going to come to a vote before year end?
I don't know, it depends on,
Yeah, I think that's the goal, that's the objective, and to do so, but we'll have a better sense. Council gives some direction tonight as to how achievable that is. I'll then speak to the applicant, and Natalie will work out a timeline. But I
Well, and
think
I'm
we will.
even thinking with meeting with the planning board, I mean, they're meeting this week on Wednesday, and then they'd only have one more meeting before year end.
well, I
Right.
think what Nick is saying in terms of like what could potentially have approved is the council's action. Like whatever the planning board then has to do with this project, like, go with grace, like that's their job.
So it's just the concept, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
the planning board doesn't have any input until after that, the
Not
concept.
at this stage according to our code. So like from here, we say, yes, we are theoretically good with this, we agree with the concept, now go and do all of the detailed stuff that you need to do with planning to make it happen. So that's what we're trying, obviously, I don't think planning board is gonna get their hands on this until the new year. Like it just,
And it's all whatever requirements, height-wise, that's all still being met, nothing's going beyond what's already approved.
Right, you're creating the box, you're creating the outer limit, so if they go to site plan and the view shed isn't protected, or if traffic were to show they can only get 130 units, not 136, that's fine. The planning board would have that discretion. The planning board can't go above it, but the planning board can go under. You're creating the outer limits of the box.
But we're not making any special bigger boxes for them. Or are we?
You're allowing otherwise greater density than would be permitted, recognizing there's a benefit in getting more BMR units.
Yeah, I guess what we saw as the low end would be more like the kind of standard of what would be permitted with no, like, special compensation.
So what was approved size-wise was what is permitted.
Right. In other words, take the commercial space, put residential units into it, but not otherwise alter it, right? And then that's sort of the low-end number. Well, what I think all we have to decide here is kind of where in that spectrum we kind of lie. Are we looking for a higher percentage than 15%? And are we willing to allow greater density as a result? If we lean in that direction, then our next step would be to approve a concept plan of that nature.
And part of that next step would be that there would be a more detailed kind of concept for us to react to and to weigh in on things like, does this have the right sight lines? Does this, protect view sheds? Does this meet the requirements of what's in the code for the council to approve a concept plan?
Yeah, I feel like as a council, over various recent iterations of us, we've talked for a long time about the idea of what can we do to increase our BMR percentage, and we've also, and part of that discussion has been the idea of, well, what incentives do we need to offer in order to make that economically viable for developers? And so I'm excited about this as an opportunity to lean into this with the input from the public, as it sounds like we'd have to get anyway as part of a public hearing for any concept plan. And so is this viable on this property? And then could it potentially translate into other properties that are potentially of this size to get that higher percentage? So as a way to have a real world example of this where we could get a higher number of units, I think is something that is worth us leaning into, and is a trade-off to what Jeff said for, yes, we're not getting the commercial. I think many of us feel like, there probably is a desire for different kinds of commercial than seem to work for this developer, but I'm fine in this particular instance with this site to instead focus on, can we get a higher than 10% BMR?
Okay, so you're leaning towards high end?
Yeah, towards high end.
I don't know if this is a question that I can ask in this discussion. To the developer, what are current vacancies you have in the current buildings?
We are roughly at 50% occupied. It's slower than we'd like.
Because that concerns me. This is going to be the test project.
Can you say a little bit more about why it concerns you?
Because if he's going to, currently there's 64, and you're saying 32 are rented, 8 of those the below market rate.
Yep.
So that's 24 rented, and we're looking at adding how much more, because is it possible to put up the lower plan and the higher plan for the numbers?
Hey, Natalie, can you do that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Nick had to duck out.
I got it.
Christian's still here,
Thank you.
as is Natalie.
So we're looking, so it's 200 more units, or that's on 136 unit? This is where, like, looking at this, I'm probably more confused.
Yeah, so the high end
And
is
just to let
a
everybody know,
total.
we did not see this ahead of time, so we're only looking at it on the screen. We don't have it
Small.
within a foot of our eyes.
Yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, so the higher end is looking at 200 total, so that's the 64 existing units, plus, within these two, if you could do building 100A and building 100B, that would be 136 units in those two buildings, right? So 200 altogether between what could be 4 buildings on site.
I think
So in these concepts here, in these zoomed in under each of these options, you're only seeing the left-hand side of the site, right? If you could If we could flip back to the slide before this real quick, just so you know, we've kind of zoomed in, right? So imagine when we're on the next slide and we're looking at low end and high end, building 200 and 300 are still off to the right, and we're just kind of zoomed into that blue box.
And if I may also address your question a little bit, so two factors that I would point out. Number one is that there's a reason when we did this exercise, we looked at one-bedrooms and studios. We have no studios on site right now. There's definitely demand for that, and I think just by the nature of it, it's a little more affordable, especially to young families that could live in a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom. And I would say the second factor is that when we look at this, and it goes back to the financing we talked about earlier, we really have to look at this in the spectrum of what the bank will be okay with. We have to hit a certain debt service coverage ratio. Interest rates are higher than when we started. We started at a very low interest rate environment, and we're maintaining a certain level that we have to maintain. If I could drop the rents and the market rate units a bit, I think that the story would change a lot. And part of our exercise when we looked at building out, whether it's a total of 115 units, 200 units, is looking at, so how much overall can we set the market rate, and we soften that more than what we have set now. So I think that's really the biggest change that will automatically happen. I think it will be a good thing for the project as a whole. And I would say also, I think the market rate units are more luxury units. It's the BMR, the 8 BMRs, the rest is has to be set higher, and that market has softened in Beacon. I think every developer here has seen that. It's not what it used to be.
So Pam, are you concerned that it might, the market may not absorb as many units? So is that a reason for fewer? Is that what you're thinking?
I just the other question I'm wondering, the units that you're looking at building, from the experience of what you built in 2 and 3, would you consider a different level, a lower level to entice more reasonable, maybe it's overpriced now?
No, we would try to, it's very possible. I think that the market has changed since we started, but I think the work from home environment has changed. There's many different factors, but I definitely, when we looked at the numbers, we are trying to soften those numbers and make it that it is more in line with what we think will absorb faster. At the end of the day, as a developer, we have to, market economics is going to make us have to set the market price where it will be absorbed. I mean, everyone would rather a lower rent and be full than a higher rent and have to bear with that pain of vacancy.
So just to understand, so when you say soften, you mean lower your rents?
Yes, absolutely.
Which I think has been our goal by developing all along,
right,
by increasing our supply along with our demand.
And this is what's
so I think this
supposed
is
to
the result.
happen.
This is exactly what we want.
But then the question is, hopefully he has that figured out in his numbers that the rents are going to be lowered because it's finally maybe
he
working.
Seems like a smart guy.
I think we have to trust that that they don't want to sit around with vacant units. Like, that's the worst thing that could be happening for this project. So you have to figure it out, and I'm sure you will.
Well, it's
Or
just
else-
when you hear 50% occupied, that's when you're like, eh.
Well, he's going to have to figure it out.
Could you talk about the demographics of the people you're attracting with these these 2-bedroom units? Are these young families?
We have a few young families. There's very, very few kids that I've seen in the building. I think it's mostly going to people who are using a second bedroom as an office or something like that. I think the 1-bedroom units were much more appealing, and
we keep talking about housing being an issue and housing a significant issue, but so is childcare. And I just think this is a significant missed opportunity for us not to consider, because maybe it's a case of if you build it, they will come. If you don't build it, they can't identify the model that works for them. Again, strongly, I just feel like there's such a missed opportunity in this.
I understand your concern, and I would just say 2 things, is that if to us it's a paradox of financing. If we had the financing, it would be something that maybe would happen. I have my reservations based on just feedback from brokers. And the second thing is that just to address a point that I think Pam, you made before, if we had a commercial tenant that walked in the door today and said, I'll take 26,000 square feet, we would be very, very happy. It's really not something that I know you only have my word to take for it, but it's not something that we're unhappy to do. It's just we haven't seen it.
Yeah. So I guess in the interest of trying to keep us on topic here, which is what do we walk away with asking you to come back with for a concept plan? It sounded like George, Pam, Paloma, and Molly were interested in seeing the higher end with more detail. Jeff?
Is not interested in seeing all residential at this site because I think it's a significant mixed-use opportunity lost.
Okay. I'm interested in the higher end.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you know what to do next?
I think so.
Great.
I'm sorry, I have one more math question to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because now that I actually read that slide longer. When we say, for example, with the low end, we would get 115 units total. That includes the 64 units we already have. 15% of 115 is 17.25 units. We already have 8, so we should be getting 9 additional units on the 115
the
total?
15% would be on the 51 units in addition.
On the 51
I know it's mixing both numbers in a way.
Okay,
But
okay.
the percentage is on the new units. We have 12.5% on the 64 instead of the 10 based on our
Okay.
old, so the blended rate would change a little bit.
Got it, okay. I think that makes the math now.
And if I may mention one more thing that's a little off topic, but in terms of public benefit, so obviously the BMR is to identify public benefit. There are 2 other things that we're working on that's really, regardless of what happens, we do want to, just based on what our feedback has been from the public and tenants in the building, is we'd like to explore putting in a dog park that's open to the public. And we're also working with a local group to maybe put in a pollinator garden. So those are 2 things along the pathway that would be open to the public. I guess
Okay.
if
Thank you.
extra.
All right.
Thanks. Oh, actually, before you get up, Jay, for the purpose of the recording of this call, can you just introduce this discussion, just introduce yourself at the end so people
Jay
listening?
Blumenfeld, High Developers.
Okay.
Great, thank
All right,
you.
Thank
And
you.
can we make sure that presentation ends up on the website along with other support materials?
Yes.
Sorry, George. Were you saying something?
No, okay.
Oh.
Thanks.
All right,
Take care.
I think we did what we needed to do, which was give a direction in that range of higher or lower, and they'll come back, and there was a couple of follow-up questions as well, so we'll get something there. And I'm hoping we can get that pretty quickly. My preference is to get this decided by this council, so we would have to see a concept plan that we could approve.
Yeah, my
only-
preference is to stop talking about this.
Yeah, just,
All right.
thank you, Natalie.
No, I mean like
Thank you.
forever.
Have a good night.
Not right now, you just
Just
need to be
forever.
done.
Yes.
Well, I do stand by what I said, that it is an interesting process to be like, what actually would merit 20% in our community? So, almost like regardless of the history of this project, I appreciate that's hard to totally ignore, nor would our
Yeah.
public want us to, but as a like, can we sustain more than 20, and how would that work in our modern day, so.
That's kind of how I'm thinking of it too. I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see like where we land with this, and hopefully that helps inform us for potential coding changes.
Right, in our comprehensive planning process, so.
Yeah.
So,
great.
yeah, and in our comp plan, the only places that we talk about allowing greater density is Main Street, train station, and Fishkill Creek. Now, we may add Route 52 when we get to our Fishkill Avenue zoning, but that's really the only places that we, that the comp plan shows that, unless we want to change the comprehensive plan. Okay, budget. So, where do we want to go with budget?
I mean, I think there's probably a continuation of some of the discussion about like the affordability and what the tasks are with the deputy city administrator. I'll also put a plug in that I would like to either hear or think about options for the firefighter staffing. I I feel like that's another gap, but I don't know what in Start River.
Yeah, I can at least give you a little bit of info that maybe Chris can too. So there is it's a grant program called SAFER that gives you a partial support of additional firefighters for a couple of years, and then so we didn't get that this year. We're going to apply again, and we're kind of hoping if we get that we'd figure out how to get over the hump. And I think the other one that we're kind of deferring on is one of the dams that we're looking to do some upgrades as well as some repair work. And again, we didn't quite get the grant we wanted. Those two are pretty significant in terms of, you know, somebody else's money. And so I think we're still deferring on those. Chris, would you add anything on fire? That's what Amber's asking about.
Yeah, I would just say thank you for raising that, because it is a concern of staff. We priced out what a firefighter would be with salary and benefits, and I'm looking for that number, but I think it's around 125 for the year. For one.
For one, yeah.
And one of the things that we thought maybe the council might look at doing is hiring somebody halfway through the year, so at least we're telegraphing. It doesn't change your budget numbers substantially, but at least shows fire we're moving in that direction. So it doesn't have to be binary, like you hire one or you don't. It could also be, we phase it in at some point next year.
And
I'm going to look for that number. The SAFER hasn't been announced yet.
I was going to ask about the cycle of that, like when it opens again, or we just don't know.
We're not sure. It was
'Cause it's
different.
federal.
It was
Okay.
different this year than it was in prior years. They only did like 1 or 2 rounds, and they used to roll them out in weekly rounds for many, many weeks. But it looks like they've actually closed the program at this point. They kind of did one dump of grants. We weren't on that. There was a Dutchess County department that did, Arlington did get, I think, 3.
They got 3?
They got 3.
A department that doesn't need them.
I was going to say.
Yeah,
That doesn't sound right.
That doesn't seem fair.
And that's a federal grant?
yeah, it's through the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, I guess I just feel a little like pessimistic, is the word, I think, that there is going to be SAFER grant funding available for this, and so it feels like something that we have to think through how to solve for, and maybe trying to do like some later in the year hiring and one at a time instead of all 3 is the right thing to do, but I don't know. I don't know what other people think.
I wouldn't propose to do all 3 at one time. We could phase them in one at a time. We've been adding one all along, and it's mostly just showing the department that we're committed to getting up to a number that's more sustainable.
Well, it's not only that. I mean, I don't know, George, you and I both saw the Alice Street fire, and
Yeah.
it's it's a matter of life or death, really.
Yeah, the way that you can think about the numbers in simple terms, right, is that the salary increases in our contracts are, going to require us to increase our budget about 3% a year, Chris, 4 to begin with. And you kind of heard at 125,000, that's just about another 1%. So, we have to figure out how to cover that. If we add 1 the first year, that's 1%. If we add another one the second year, that's 2%, and then 3, and then it's permanently 3. So we kind of have to, this is how we think about the problem out loud when we present a budget, and it will take some work to kind of get it, because the next couple of budgets are all dealing with the salary increase issues, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good step. I'm sort of thinking along the lines of Amber, of, wanting to take a step in this direction. I'm curious also, knowing that, SAFER was a federal grant, and feeling similarly pessimistic that it may return, if there are any steps we could take to flag this issue to our assembly person or somebody who might be able to step in on the state level to recognize that this is an issue. And thinking about the Alice Street fire, I mean, that number that the chief gave, that there were supposed to be, I think he said 17 people on a house fire that size, and we had, I think, 3. Recognizing that that is a concern for our region. If there's a house fire that large, even through mutual aid, we're getting a lot of support, but I imagine this is an issue that, all of our local fire departments are facing, and wondering if there's advocacy we could be doing to address the larger issue.
4. We have 4 around the clock on duty. So the immediate response were the Beacon Fire Department, but then Castle Point and Village of Fishkill both responded. And you can't get the number that you need without the mutual aid program, right?
Yep.
Everybody knows that at this stage. But, we're looking, we're looking.
Yeah, and I guess, Paloma, I appreciate that line of thinking. It's like if the federal government isn't going to continue support of that grant, is there an equivalent that the state might consider providing to its municipalities? So, yeah.
Are we anticipating, I know this year with the new development, new tax money, is there going to be an increase for next year?
We have the benefit every year of getting about 1.5% from new construction. That's going to continue for a while, so that's part of our revenue side of the problem, right? And we have a couple of new bits of revenue that are coming in that we're not sure where it will come in. The hotel tax is coming in. We have to get it renewed because it's going to expire this year unless we get it done again. So we're kind of looking at how do you build up to that 3 or 4 or 5%. But there are opportunities, right? We just have to be cautious how we do it. I think doing something incrementally is a correct approach, which I hear you saying, right?
And
we
Mayor,
start to get there?
I found the number that was quoted to us. So a new hire in 2026 with all salary, fringe, clothing, stipends would be $124,637. So 125.
And then if they had to go for training, that's additional?
Yeah, the
if
training.
they don't have experience?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we've been lucky lately about attracting people who've already been trained. So with the new pay rates that you put in, I think we would have an easier time getting a transfer that wouldn't have to have all that training. And you had that immediately after we even announced the terms of the new contract. We had Danny Burke come from the Village of Fishkill.
Okay. Other topics? Is there a change to the budget we would do and associated with this conversation?
Well, let me just ask, you raised it at the start of your mention, your statement about the housing coordinator position. We did receive a task list that, as we've been requesting in draft form just shortly before this meeting. What is the process for us to comment on that, for that to take shape? Because, there's definitely questions and recommendations I have for that.
Okay.
Is that
That is a question.
Is that for us to just discuss now, or Jeff, are you asking for?
I'm asking, is that what we're to do? No one's seen it, basically. I don't know if everyone even had a chance to take a look at it. So I want to know what the process is, how we're diving into that.
Well, we can discuss now, or we can discuss next meeting, either one, right? We wanted to give you what we put together as soon as we put it together, basically.
We can discuss it to some degree, but I have probably like half a dozen or more suggestions for things that should be included, including some KPIs, timeline. There's a lot of things that were not identified in that short list.
Yeah, similarly would like to have it. In terms of the budget, I don't know if it impacts the numbers of the budget directly and the fire discussion similarly, so I'm just wondering, maybe as a council decide, do we want to? I appreciate, we've had lots of people talk about housing, so I could see some benefit to our constituents to try to put some more detail around the housing before we vote on the budget, even if we know that the numbers of the budget won't change. So I could see an argument either way, but I think people would appreciate that.
Well, it gets to the point of if there's some resources, some necessary strategies that should be carried out should be budgeted with an external resource. It's definitely budget related in that case. If we determine that there's a lot that's being asked of the current person, who will remain unnamed for the moment, alongside their other tasks, do we need to budget something for some additional work to meet what we need, that we generally agree should be done?
Yeah, I think in that case, having that discussion now, if we think that, what I'm thinking of that 75,000 as
Right.
initiatives, if we feel that the resource of that isn't enough, that we should bring that up publicly now.
But didn't that money get,
This year's money,
This year's money.
50,000.
Yeah, I'm thinking of 2026 money.
okay.
It's in the
Yes.
budget.
Never mind, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the question is, what happens with that other 25? But that's not a 2026 budget discussion.
There we go. Sorted that out.
Yeah.
To pick up, Jeff, on what I think you're alluding to, I see a few, in my quick review of the coordinator duties as drafted, because we did just receive it this afternoon. I personally saw a few opportunities for potential additional budget lines, particularly. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I think the public has not seen this, and I'd love to see a draft shared with the public whenever we can. But in the document, the first bullet point was update, manage, and promote the city's housing resource page, periodically solicit feedback from and contact relevant agencies and not-for-profits to check for any changes or additional items to be listed. I think that this section could be expanded out to include other forms of proactive communication or outreach. I'm sure, Jeff, you have some thoughts on that topic. And I'm wondering if this position should have a budget for that outreach. I think that could be relevant. And looking at the last bullet point, Number 7, work with the city planner on planning and zoning code topics identified as a priority by the city administration and council. Similarly, work with the city planner to identify areas of recommended focus to encourage adequate access to affordable housing in the city. I'm wondering if it would be helpful to even ballpark the number of hours or sort of scope that this person can expect access to the city planner for this work, whether that comes out of the $75K that is in the council budget or somewhere else, and potentially an additional budget for other consultancy as needed and potential trainings and professional development. Those were the 2 bullet points that stuck out to me as potential areas that could use additional budget, but that's just on that specific topic. I have other thoughts on other bullet points.
Yeah, in the terms of hours committed to, I mean, you make good points about budgetary requirements if we need access to the planner for this position, but I mean, fundamentally, it's like, I'd like to see more detail about how many hours is this person going to be able to contribute to these tasks and the milestones and the KPIs that are associated with that. Again, so we understand if we have the resource that we need, or that we collectively agree is needed.
So my impression is that you're asking questions at a level of detail that really can't be addressed right now. So,
yeah, so it's a
since
process
all
question.
new, you know, you kind of have to go into it and have some flexibility. I think the way we generate some flexibility is by maintaining a pot that's the council's pot, and that if along the way it's discovered that, you know, well, we need some more of the planner's time on this topic, then we would allocate to it, or we need some, you know, outsourcing some particular task that where we decide in the city we don't do very well and is important, then we would come and look for some funding for that. I think that's the way to approach it.
And what would the mechanism be for the council to sort of identify that gap and give feedback that we'd like to spend that money? Is it through these, number 5, provide periodic reports? That at that point we would give that feedback that, like, this is the area that we would want you to invest more time in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would assume that.
But those reports should include that specific ask, is that you identify the risks and the mitigations and the needs in those reports, and we schedule, we've always taught calendar, you calendar those reports so that we know, so that the council knows, the future council.
Mayor, if I could, maybe a way forward is to rename the city council planning line, city council initiatives. And that gives you broader flexibility. I'll also note that when the council has put initiatives in the budget in the past, you have left details to the administration. There's a difference between budgeting something and telling us your goals and figuring out exactly how it has to go. So let me give you an example. Years ago, the council, when I first came on, had put participatory budgeting in their budget. And we actually figured out a really good way of implementing that, and it's become one of the things we're most proud of. You're going to have to let us work, because we're going to learn stuff about how much time it takes and what the demand is, and then what the resources are. And again, you have a draft. We had asked all of you for what you wanted, and since we put the budget in, we haven't had anything other than what the public has presented, which is a list that I can get off a website from BCAN. So we tried to put together what we thought was a reasonable list. We looked at what other people were doing. But again, we're in a budget process, which is 10,000 feet, and Jeff, you're at about 500 feet. And that's really not the role of budgeting. And I think if Nick was here, he'd remind you that there is there's general budget guidelines. You can figure out how many employees we have. You can figure out what your goals are. Listing out the KPIs on this that's not budgeting, that's managing it. So, again, I think you have to give us some opportunity to work it. We've piloted a number of programs that you've never detailed out, and somehow we've actually gotten them to work.
So for budget, any thoughts on this area?
I agree with the flexibility approach you talked about, but I do think that as long as there's a structured way, so that, to Paloma's point, that there is a process by which we know we can make those allocations from that renamed pot of funding.
Yeah, I know there's, for example, in this draft, reference to quarterly meetings of a task force. Could we perhaps expound on the fifth bullet point, that the council requests quarterly reports from this position? Does that feel reasonable, or is that outside of the scope?
I would again just remind you, you're in a budgeting process. This is just an idea of what we think we can do with what we have in-house. You're designing the program. You don't do that through a budget. You basically tell us the goal, and you tell us what you want to achieve. So if you want to have feedback on this, write down what the goals are. Don't tell us exactly how to get there, because things change and we need to have some flexibility. We can't manage anything.
Well, in order to spend the $75,000, which we had a hard time spending last year, I am looking forward to how we're going to spend it next year. And I think that in order to make those decisions about how to spend $75,000 of the budget on city council initiatives, we need to establish a line of communication on where these projects are going.
We wouldn't spend that line without coming back to the council. We would do exactly what we did this year, which is we said we want to spend $50,000 of that on the food program. We didn't just go and grab that money from a line. We actually did a change. If you do initiatives, we'll come back to you and say we want to tap this fund for X amount. It's basically the city council's fund, and we'll respect that.
Okay.
And again, like, if you want to design the program, then that's not a budget exercise.
I don't understand how asking for reports is us designing the program.
I don't think that you can require us to do anything other than try to get to a goal. There's a lot of things you put in the budget every year that have no details, and we have to figure out ways to implement them. Sometimes we get there, and sometimes we don't. You've put stuff in the budget in the past, like free taxi service, and when we went, it wasn't even legal to do. So again, it may not even make sense for us to do that. Let us have some time to work on the program.
I think I want to jump in here quickly.
Well, it's about time.
A good explanation for this is when the city goes towards a capital project and the council approves, let's say, an upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant. The council approves that, and then at the staff and administration level, it contracts, it prepares bids, it goes out to bid. Yet the budget doesn't detail necessarily when that bid would occur, exactly what materials are going to be used. It provides a framework for how that process goes along. And so I think here with what the budget would do and what the council would be approving is this position. And then as we move forward, those details of that position can get refined further, as well as the amount prorated or reserved for that position could get expended.
We're not approving a position, Christian. We're approving a scope of work.
The scope of work. So I think that's even more like a public works project where you are approving a generalized scope of work and then the details get addressed at a future date.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, of course, we'll provide periodic reporting. The frequency of it, I bet you the first one won't happen for a while because it's going to take us a while to develop something, right? So I think if you want to take this approach of creating initiatives and are considering using some of that initiative money for this effort, approve the budget, we'll get started, you'll see periodic reports, and you'll make a judgment call, right?
I really wish the public had an opportunity to see this document that we're all talking about. I think it would be worthwhile.
Yep.
So I'm hesitant to really get into details of it without the public having the opportunity to look at it. Do we have an opportunity to do that before we finally vote on the budget?
We can post this publicly so they have it before the next budget hearing. But again, we asked all of you to put this list together, and we got nothing back. Not one email.
I think it's a great list.
And so like Ben worked diligently on this with the attorney to come up with something.
Right.
We're not approving the job description. You're approving a budget. And again,
But I think what I think it all comes down to is if we didn't have this scope of work, we wouldn't know if we should be asking to have an additional position within the city of Beacon. So
Correct.
that's, I feel, what we needed this, and unfortunately, it's all happening kind of when the budget's presented, but I just feel, in that sense, it's changing the thinking of what is needed in the budget.
but Pam, the irony of that is many of you wanted a new position, and you never gave us a scope for that position. We were asking for the scope for that position. So like, again,
I don't know, maybe I missed.
Excuse me, but I don't remember being asked for a scope. And I remember hearing, we were asked for the job description, and they said it was going to be provided, and it was provided. So I just please, this characterization that we didn't give something that was asked for, let's please.
Well, Jeff, we did ask for your input, and I didn't receive any input.
When did you ask for that input?
Weeks ago. We
Was I
asked,
absent from that meeting?
you might have been, you were absent for a couple, I don't know, I don't keep track of.
Rather than get into it, right? Look, for the budget, you can either fund a position if you want, or you can fund an initiatives area. Either way, we're going to proceed with doing something incrementally. I just think that's the right answer. I think the only reason you're looking at it's a position is because others have advocated for it. That's great. I'm glad they're advocating for that. But we're looking at the work, and we're not seeing, as we compare it to other places that have a full position, that their duties are distinctly different and include many more things than we actually need in Beacon. As I mentioned to you before, the Kingston position, as it was described to me by an elected official, spends the bulk of their time trying to get development to occur in Kingston and trying to develop properties that the city of Kingston owns that aren't being developed. We don't have those problems at all. We have plenty of people who want to develop here. And so we didn't think that this required a full-time position like it does elsewhere, and that we would build it incrementally. If you disagree with that, change the budget. If you do agree with it, we think the right approach is to have some of the discretionary funds available. If you like that approach, then that's what's in the budget. If you don't, do something else in the budget.
I'm not opposed to this incremental approach because it's progress, and that is what I think needs to happen. I am a little confounded by this idea that we haven't given feedback. I think we give feedback constantly at this table. And I'm sorry that I missed or didn't understand what format the feedback was supposed to be given in, that it was supposed to be an email in a specific way. And regardless, I'm sort of with what others have said, that I think this is a good scope of work. And my understanding when it was sent to us was that this was an opportunity to give feedback. If that's not the case, then I'm not sure why we're discussing this, as Jeff mentioned at the beginning.
So this is an opportunity to provide feedback. We've given you a draft, and take a look. And again, if I compare that to the Kingston example, again, this is a fraction of their job, right? Because the things that they have to do in Kingston to get construction going is very different from Beacon, and that's what they spend the bulk of their time doing, as far as I know. So if you like this scope of work, it doesn't amount to the full position that's in Kingston. So I think we're accurate that it's not a full-time position. We don't know whether it will take, 3 hours a week or, 35 hours a week. We're going to find that out. And, if it's different, we will learn and you will get feedback on it. So for this piece of paper, if you could provide feedback on it, that would be great in the next couple of days. We'll figure out how to post it, and we'll go from there.
Can you clarify what type of feedback you're accepting on this?
Anything you like. You can rewrite it, you can add tasks, you can take away tasks, it's whatever works.
I think that's the opposite of what we just heard from Chris.
No, I just am not going to be told that we're going to do quarterly, like, you can figure out what tasks you want, but this is a budget exercise too. Like, you're basically figuring out, do you want to add something to the budget or do you not want to add something to the budget? That's what it comes down to, Paloma. What do you want to add?
But to Pam's point, we don't know that
Well,
unless we understand
then figure it out. We
just got it.
I'm not saying you have to make a decision tonight, but I'm just saying you want to design exactly what this is. Give us feedback, but give us the flexibility to implement it.
Yeah, so read the tasks. One of them is provide periodic reports. Okay, it's in there.
Quarterly is.
Again, at that high level, provide periodic reports. That should be perfectly fine. So take a look. If you want to talk about the details of it, I would say don't go there. I would say stick to tasks that involve a bullet point that starts with a verb and what you want the person to do. Once you get into the details, I don't think it's useful. And the only objective is to say, these are the tasks that we want this person to focus on, and therefore, it will take an estimate of time that requires a full-time job. Every time we put it together, we didn't see it. But if you have 18 more tasks that we're missing, maybe we will. So take a look. Please focus on tasks, right? Start with a verb. What does that person do?
And can I clarify, this list is focused on housing coordination duties. My understanding of the position we're discussing is Deputy City Administrator. There is also discussion in past workshops of this person potentially working on the expansion of the recreation department, if I understand correctly, to become the Recreation and Community Services Department. Is now a time to give feedback on, high-level feedback on that idea?
So let me see if I've got this right. We are forming a deputy city administrator position.
Yes.
But I think what was asked was whether we needed an additional position in addition to that for housing-specific tasks. And so we have come back and said that we don't think that a full-time position is necessary, that those tasks can be covered by the person who's going to fill the position of deputy city administrator. So I think the work in front of you is to assess the tasks that we've put up as a draft list for housing specific things. If you want to do something else in association with the position of deputy city administrator, that's fine, but I think we're just at the budgeting cycle. So again, the deeper you get into it, the further we are from a budgeting discussion and the more we are to a how you run the city discussion, which frankly isn't appropriate in this type of a setting.
So I guess I can ask, who is filling the mayor's assistant workload? Is that something we need to consider, since there is a person currently doing that who will be shifting?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. The specifics for the assistant to the mayor have been fulfilled by the person who has that position, in addition to a really large number of other tasks that aren't in that job description. And those tasks are effectively serving as a deputy city administrator. So I don't think it is a significant need that will have to be backstop filled. However, if it does show up as the person's really busy and the basic setting up the meetings tasks that were in the original assistant to the mayor position aren't getting filled, then we'll fill it, right? We'll come in and probably do something part-time.
Should that be budgeted?
Well, again, I would think we should try it out and see, right? I mean, if you want to put it in the budget, that's fine, but I just think we should try it out and see, because I think what we're finding now is that more and more, as that person becomes efficient and effective, that time opens up to do additional things, right?
I think it's relevant, though, what Paloma was asking. It's like, so maybe what we need is not a very detailed, but at something like 25% of their time, 50% of their time, 10% of their time for the overall deputy city administrator position job description. Maybe it's not just housing that we need. I guess the question is, are we approving and thinking that we have budgetary sufficiency for this spectrum of tasks that this person needs to do? Did I characterize that right, Paloma, that that's what you're kind of saying, that there was discussion about some other duties being lumped in there, and we want to know percentage breakdown about what's going to be required?
I don't know that I necessarily am looking for a percentage breakdown.
I'm trying to keep it high level. I'm trying to keep up that 50,000 foot level.
I know that I know that's how your brain works. I think that I am just trying to understand what the right kind of feedback, what the right level of feedback is, that is what is acceptable to the administration. And maybe I shouldn't even say that. I should say is the correct division of duties between the city council and the administration. So if I, for example, say a goal to the scope of work of a deputy city administrator is to increase the stock of subsidized and affordable units in Beacon, is that the correct goal or correct way to say that goal in this context?
That doesn't strike me as a task, right? A task would be to work with so-and-so to get that as an achieved thing.
Okay, so we're being asked for both tasks and goals.
Up to you.
Well,
right?
no, I'm asking.
Just leave it.
Hmm?
You can
Whatever
do
you
what
want.
you want. You're the
Yeah.
council.
Yeah.
You can make it,
Well, I
you
would
can
like
you can either amend the budget or you leave the budget as it is.
I would like to
We're
know-
so deep in the weeds on this that you're beyond budgeting. Like, just move, give us your feedback. I mean, you guys are like, we haven't had time to read it and you want to argue about it. Read it and come back to us. We have another workshop.
Okay.
Like, I don't,
I'm
I,
not
like,
trying
what
to
is,
argue about the content. I'm trying to give feedback on the content, and whenever I give feedback, I'm told I'm doing it the wrong way, and so I'm trying to understand.
Paloma, geez.
I think what would be helpful
We need
is if
Nick here.
there is
We really need
missing,
Nick.
All right, let's.
a missing scope that the council would like to see this position, or not this position, I'm sorry, for these duties to include. If something is missing or if something needs to be refined, that would be helpful. I think it's important also to remember that when we have positions such as a new police officer or firefighter or someone in the wastewater treatment plant, the details of the, exactly the division of those day to day is not necessarily outlined in detail, but a generalized overview of what that person would expect to do.
And Christian, would you describe what you just described as a task?
Well, I described it kind of as a scope of responsibilities. And I also think we might be getting a bit into how do we call it. I think here we have 7 paragraphs, some of them are a couple sentences, that detail kind of what the scope of these duties would be. And it would be helpful if they're missing any or any that need to be refined, but there is a concern that getting too into the details defeats the overall purpose of providing funding as well as a direction.
So let me just propose a way forward here.
Thank you.
Provide any feedback that you like of any kind. If you can do so in the next couple of days, that would be great. In the meantime, anything that you provide us, we will probably adapt it and post it so people can see it in the public for the next meeting. And then as for the budget, again, it's still your choice. Do you want to do something with the budget as proposed, or do you want to do something differently? And those are up to you all to make suggestions or motions, okay?
Regarding the budget, I agree with that we should include some money for a fireman, maybe a half year, as you suggested, Chris. I think it would be worthwhile just to establish that in
Is
every
that a
budget.
motion?
Excuse me?
Is it a motion?
I guess so, yeah.
Second.
Well, can we make motions in
No,
workshop?
not
I
right
think-
now, 'cause this
Yeah,
is a-
but again, you got it. You got it.
So, yeah.
Sorry, I thought he said we had to make a motion.
And I would just say, if you're going to do that, just tell me how you want to deal with that. Like, we would just add additional use of fund balance?
Or
Like,
would we
just
cut
think-
something?
Yeah,
don't
so
think
you
that's
have 3
anything
ways
to
of doing it. You can raise taxes more, you can tap fund balance, or you can cut something else. So just think about how you want to deal with that.
Now?
No, when you do, next week,
That's
or,
right.
So in the meantime, can we figure out what the dollar amount we think we have in mind, and when we would put it in? Like halfway through the year would be a half
yeah, why don't we just say 63
yeah. All right?
for a half year? And the easiest of those is just to tap fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. Because we kept that use of fund balance the same year over year.
Okay. If there's any others, here, you can do it now, or you can do it the next meeting.
Yeah, the only thing, the scope of services on the county's scope of work for the pedestrian facilities of our 55 miles of roads, of that inventory, they're saying that's going to be done in three months, not from today, but, the timeline of them doing it. And it's going to be looking at the inventory of the sidewalks, curb ramps, marked crosswalks, pedestrian signals. I'm just wondering, once that report comes out, if within, at that time to up to 2 years, that we're going to need to look at what money's needed or what grants we need to work on getting to kind of take advantage of the report of what needs to be done for the pedestrians and I'm going to say it again, I feel like bicycles need to be incorporated in that thought, and always think of people with disabilities, because we definitely don't have the most, the easiest way to travel for people in wheelchairs or with disabilities, even going down Main Street with all the sidewalk, with all the
And
business
the inventory
tables and
will
chairs.
include ADA concerns. After the last meeting, I did confirm that with Mark DeBald.
Okay,
And we discussed it during the kickoff meeting. So when they talk about rating the conditions, it's also going to include ADA.
because it's going to, like, open up a can of worms of what we really need to focus on in the future, and not
Yeah.
that it can't be the, immediate future, but I just wanted to throw that out, whether that comes out of something that's there from the city council's money as it comes forward.
Les?
I had the same question about if the inventory would include which sidewalks comply with ADA standards, so that's good
Yes.
to hear. That it will. I was also curious to understand if it would include an assessment of the city's, property lines or right-of-way, and if there's any instances of sidewalks not following property lines.
It's not going to include that.
Okay,
That would be really expensive. Survey is very expensive.
okay,
Yeah, there'll be a bunch of instances like that, without a question.
sure.
Right.
And I'm assuming that it would be the same answer to my next question, which is around correspondingly clarifying the width of the road at any given point, that would be considered a survey and would not be.
That's not in the scope of services. This is a sidewalk inventory only.
Okay.
That includes curbs, curb ramps, pedestrian assistive devices like lights.
In terms of that inventory, I'm guessing it will also include the instances where the location of the utility poles are in the middle of the sidewalk?
It will look at ADA compliance.
Okay.
And speaking of signs, I'm not sure, did we hear anything back on for the speed signal on Washington?
Yes. Yeah, we have a price, it was $37.50.
Okay.
So the chief is following up. He has money in his budget this year.
Oh, this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Excellent.
Susan's told him to spend it.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
And he'll figure out exactly, I know you had suggested where it goes. He's going to vet with his team where it goes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, are we ready to go on to the franchise renewal? It's all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think, Christian, that one's on you?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
So the council presently has before it a renewal of its cable franchise agreement with Cablevision of Wappinger Falls. It is the current, it's Optium, which is the current vendor, and council had previously had a public hearing. That public hearing was to gather public input. I do know that there was a question that came in regarding telephone service as well as customer service for telephones. Under the state and federal regulations, this cable franchise agreement, it only addresses cable. It cannot address telephone or internet or other modes of media or access to those kind of technologies. And so there's also a limited scope of provisions that any municipality in the state of New York has authority to govern. One is the franchise fee. The next is the channels for public access, education, government, free services to public buildings and schools, right-of-way management to make sure that if they have any utilities, and consumer protection regulations as long as they're not inconsistent with state and federal laws. So here, the council has already had its public hearing, heard from the public, And so right now, we're trying to gather input from the council on any final comments or areas of concern so that the council can move forward with adopting this as the existing cable franchise agreement expires early next month. And so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I don't have any questions.
I'm good.
So is this, it was saying 5% of gross revenue? Is that in our budget line for revenue? I guess that would be you, Chris.
I believe so.
So can you
Where in
ask
the
a-
budget line is the cable, the
Franchise.
revenue?
It's under franchise fee,
In the
Oh,
revenue
okay.
side.
Okay,
and I don't think that's the only one. I think your electric pays a franchise fee, too.
okay. And then I guess just the to be discussed is just what benefits we're going to be getting out of this, like on the 17.5 on page 14?
Yes, for the additional, page 17, you said?
14, 17.5.
Yeah, so that would be for additional public uses. Let me pull that up here. Sorry, I scrolled way too quickly. Yes, and so for those provide the public educational programming and free access to schools in the city. And so we've been working with city staff as well as the cable franchise to make sure that the facilities that need it are included. Any facilities that are no longer needed because they're not being used or it doesn't make sense are removed.
And Christian, I would just note, we need to do a little cleanup work to Exhibit A, because it has the old fire companies on it, and it has the old highway department facility at Creek Road. So we'll work with you. A couple of those have to be taken off.
Excellent, thank you. I'll make a note of that as we speak.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. It seems so obsolete that we have this. I don't, like.
It is required under state law. They unfortunately can't offer these services unless they have a cable franchise agreement.
Yeah,
People use it, though.
they do, but it's like you'd think we should get something for internet usage.
Yeah.
We'd have a lot more money.
Right.
Okay. Okay, you got any other feedback on it, just, let Christian know or one of us. Last one is just amendments to the recreation fee schedule. And again, Christian, you're going to take us through that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So presently, we have recommended an increase to the city's recreation fees. The recreation fees were last updated in 2017. And so the proposed increases, and I apologize because the version that made it into the council's agenda did not show the track changes to show a comparison of what they are currently and what they're proposed to be increased to. But this would increase these recreation fees at an approximate level of inflation since 2017, which is roughly 30%. It also would do away with a staggered decrease for site plans per dwelling units. And that really is because whether you have 2 units or 50 units, the same amount of people need the same amount of recreational areas. And so as you get more density, the need for those recreational areas and services does not decrease necessarily. And so I know that there has been a concern raised about applicability. It would currently apply to all subdivisions and site plan approvals granted after December 31st. The council can modify that to change when this would be applicable, either to applications that have not yet been submitted or at some future date it would apply. And just for the council's and the public's information, the current recreation fee is $4,500, proposing to increase it to $6,000. And then for site plans again, it would do away with a staggered decrease, and it would set a flat $2,000 per dwelling unit, which is above the $1,500 currently assessed for the 1st through 10th unit.
So, I mean, I certainly agree that our fees should increase to keep up with inflation and, you know, so I appreciate this coming in. I think the one question I have, and Christian, you kind of touched on it. So essentially for a subdivision, it's an increase of $1,500. The thing that I'm wondering about is, and I'll kind of go back to the conversations we had around accessory dwelling units, of there being like different types of applications and how we support somebody who's kind of a homeowner trying to increase housing versus like a large, you know, maybe a large subdivision. And maybe that distinction does not exist in this use case. But that is a long way of saying, I'm wondering if there are different types of subdivisions that we should consider in the fee structure. Like, should a large subdivision pay more than $6,000?
So the law, the enabling statutes, as well as other municipalities that we've surveyed, they don't differentiate regardless of the type of or size of the subdivision. It's just by subdivision. So if someone has a double-sized lot, they receive subdivision approval, they would pay the subdivision lot fee just once. They wouldn't pay it twice, even though they would have 2 lots. They would only pay it once because they received approval for a subdivision. So it's by the number, and we haven't seen where it's by the size of the subdivision or by the use, and that doesn't appear to be supported by state law to make that type of differentiation.
So the example you gave, so I have a big lot, I have a house on it, I subdivide it, so just by subdividing I have to pay the 6. And then if I build a house on that subdivided lot, I pay for 1 unit if I build a single house, is that right?
I don't believe that site plans are required for single-family houses.
I thought it was the
So the subdivision, they would pay the fee for the subdivision, but then they wouldn't, unless site plan is required, they would not have to pay that per dwelling unit additional fee for site plans.
Okay.
Or alternatively, if someone is doing a subdivision and they offer recreational areas that can be used by the public, they may not have to pay this type of fee.
So a couple of clarifying questions. So if you're doing an ADU, you're not subdividing, but do you need a site plan? Do you have to pay a site plan, the site plan fee? That's one.
I don't think so. I think that's what we got rid of.
Just want to make sure, just for the public. And 2 is, I guess the other question, I'll just ask it since there was silence there. Is there a formula for how much parkland that they can put on site to avoid the fee?
It is a test, and that test, the planning board must evaluate whether the applicant is able to provide sufficient recreational areas to meet the needs of the community. And so in 2017, there was a study done which assessed the needs of the community, assuming growth, and recommended a certain type of fee for when an applicant can't provide that. However, if an applicant can, and they can provide studies, these are typically done by their professional, either engineers or architects, which state we have this size of project, therefore it's going to generate X amount of need for recreational space. Here we can provide a small playground and green space, which should satisfy it. So there is some backing for these, but it's made at the planning board level.
So it's on a case-by-case basis and evaluated by the planning board?
Yes, it is always a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And the ADU question, is that confirmation that we got rid of that requirement for ADU site plan?
I will confirm with that. As I don't want to speak without just confirming with other staff.
Okay.
Would it be worth considering, rather than wait 8 years to catch up with inflation, like it's done annually?
Or even biannually?
I don't know who I'm asking that to, but...
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean,
Seems
is
like
there a
it'd
way
be-
to put language in here that would trigger something like based on the CPI? If the CPI varies, that the fees are to be adjusted the same way within like 60 calendar days or something?
Typically, that would be a little bit difficult, and we would want any increases to these fees to come before the council, so the council can review it and opine on it. And also, the council is required in each instance to approve these. And so, even if we were able to find a way to have kind of a guaranteed increase being triggered by increases in the CPI, I think we would still want the council to review it and make sure that the proposed increase is flexible.
Okay. And you were saying that if this goes into effect, it wouldn't take effect until the new year, or?
So, as drafted, the proposed language is that these increases in fees would apply to all subdivision and site plan approvals granted after December 31st, so starting January 1st. There are several applications pending before the planning board, so if they are able to receive their approvals before the new year, they would be assessed, if needed, a recreation fee under today's fee schedule. But if they received approvals next year, they would fall under the new proposed recreation fee. So the council has the authority to amend essentially the effective date.
And Christian, is there any precedent or mechanism to roll this out over time? This is just a large jump since we haven't addressed it in 8 years.
If that was the case, I think that the council should propose a lower fee, and then it could be revisited in the future, or alternatively, set the effective date to only apply to new applications submitted after, say, Friday, so that any pending applications don't necessarily have to worry about it. They already know what the fees are in order to address that concern. In my research, I didn't come across any other municipalities that kind of do that at a set regular rate. Typically, recreation fees are evaluated on an as needed basis.
And did you also just look at the fees generally in other municipalities that are similar to us, Christian, in terms of if we approve this change, would it be in line with what other municipalities are charging, or is that range very varied?
It varies, and we did look at other municipalities, and so I think it's also important to note that Beacon is unique for the region. But, for example, the city of Peekskill, they charge $5,500 per unit for subdivisions, and then $5,500 per unit for site plans. The town of Fishkill assesses a $5,000 subdivision lot, and then a $5,000 per unit for site plan. And that's kind of the theme that we saw when we looked at this. For example, the town of East Fishkill, $6,500 per lot with a subdivision, and then $1,000 per unit, or $2,500 per unit when there's 7 or more units. $2,250, I'm sorry. And so it does vary, and I think it's important to look at, similar municipalities, which is a bit difficult because Beacon is very unique. But we did look at other municipalities.
So I'm comfortable raising it now, so.
I'd be comfortable raising it now, but anyone who has an application in currently, they wouldn't be subject to these fees.
It's okay.
That's what I would say, until, like, if they had it in by Friday
Right.
or something, because they've kind of have gone,
They've calculated
put their
this in,
application in with their calculations.
All right, council, all right with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that distinction.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay, so that's the one change, Christian, is applicability?
Understood, thank you.
All right. I think that's all we got. All right, so let me just announce the next meeting, which is next Monday, the 17th at 7 PM, right here.
And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
So Molly and Paloma, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Christian.
Thank you. Have a good evening.